Hello, and welcome to this introduction to the Army Lessons process. My name is Major James Fish, and I currently work in the Lessons Exploitation Centre. This is part of the Land Warfare Centre, and we are based down in Warminster. So, to begin, I just want to highlight three key tenets that go towards making a decent lessons culture. The first one is a recognition that lessons are actually about a growth mindset. It's about recognizing that each time we do something, we can potentially enhance our performance and get a little bit better each time we do that activity. It's about avoiding mistakes that have happened before and then ensuring that knowledge is passed on to those who come after us to make sure that they don't repeat the same mistakes and also have opportunities to develop where appropriate. That said, what it's not about is apportioning blame or finger pointing. It's a recognition that there may be something in the system, a bit of kit, a bit of capability that needs to be developed because currently they are performing at a suboptimal standard. The final thing to highlight is that actually everybody has a part to play in lessons. It doesn't matter if you're clinical staff, supporting staff, administrative staff, you'd be really amazed at who might have a macro level view on the issues the teams are facing. The next thing to discuss is about why the lessons process is important. I've used here Simon Sinek's Golden Circles, and if you've not come across these, I would thoroughly recommend giving it a quick Google at some point when you've got about 20 spare minutes, because he talks through it far better than I do. But actually, what he highlights in that video is that a lot of people in today's society focus on what. And in this example, you may see the lessons process as another piece of bureaucracy that's taking away time from delivering the core outputs of the NHS, or in my case, the Army. But actually, if you think about why we're doing this, as mentioned on the previous slide, it's about getting a little bit better each time we do something to improve our performance. So in the army setting, that's about being better on operations and therefore exposing our soldiers to less risk. And potentially in the NHS concept, it's about delivering better healthcare and helping people save lives. You begin to see that actually what we do with the lessons process is take a little bit of pain now to save a lot more effort a bit further down the line. And the key linkage between the two about how we get better at delivering our core outputs, the difference between the why and the what is the how. And the how is all about we analyze that information that's captured in the lessons process and feed that back into the activity that we're doing to deliver our core outputs. What I'd like to do now is just highlight a couple of examples of where people have adopted a lessons culture to great effect. The first one is Sir Clive Woodward, the only Northern Hemisphere coach to ever win a Rugby World Cup. And one of his key selection criteria were deciding if players were rocks or sponges. And what he meant by that was a rock might be the best player in the world right now, but they were unwilling to change and didn't look for those opportunities to develop because of the status they had achieved. Compare that with what he preferred, sponges, people who might not be the best players in the world right now, but because of their drive and their ability to take on board new information and their willingness to learn, he understood that they would become the best players in the world and they would keep pace with the development of the game. The other person I'd like to highlight is a chap called Satya Nadella, and he took over Microsoft in 2014, and since then Microsoft have improved their turnover by a third every year. And he puts it down to that simple phrase up on the screen now. How can we build a culture of learn-it-alls as opposed to a culture of know-it-alls? As an antithesis to the previous slide, this is what to avoid. Don't use the excuse of being too busy to take a little bit of effort now, which might ultimately save you an awful lot of time, effort, and resource much later down the line by enhancing your capability and working for that improvement. The next thing I'd like to do is offer up a few ideas about how the Army currently do the lessons process. These really are just ideas and something for you to take away, reflect upon, and potentially try to map across to your area of work. We currently use the aptly named CARE model, and this comes from NATO. The first phase, the C, is about capturing successes or failures when delivering an output. This may take the form of an after-action review or simply mentally logging issues during the event. Anyone who is helping deliver the output should have the ability to contribute to the lesson capture, as you may need a differing range of views during the next phase. That phase is the A of CARE and stands for analysis. This is about unearthing the root cause of an issue and identifying what needs to change in order to improve performance. I will cover some of the tools we currently use to do lessons analysis in a few slides' time. But as a result of your analysis, you should have a pretty good idea of how you can improve and which elements of the system need to be changed. This will allow you to move on to the third phase, the R of care, standing for raise or resolve. If an issue is within a team's ability to change, then they should be empowered to do so. However, if a team can't do it or they don't have the authority to, then it needs to be raised to somebody who can. And when I say raise, it's not just about telling them that something needs to change, but it's about presenting the correct evidence in order for them to make an informed decision. The final phase, E, is the exploitation, and this is about how you take advantage of the changes you've made and the information you've gained from doing the activity right back at the start of the process. It's important you also use this to inform the next time that team performs. Therefore, the process is ensuring improvements in performance throughout the cycle. There are many methods of exploitation that account for differing learning styles, the amount of time people may have to absorb new information, and so on, but careful consideration must be made about how that information is promulgated. This also must be a cyclical process that drives the enhancement of performance. As such, a fundamental of lessons is the retention of knowledge. If there isn't a database where this knowledge can be retained, all that ends up happening is that a team at a single point in time will improve, but as people move on or as another team undertakes that task, their knowledge disappears and performance doesn't improve over time. This highlights the importance of lesson exploitation and the retention of knowledge. So what might this look like in a practical application? Well, let's imagine we've got a team down here in the bottom left of the slide, and that could be any kind of team. But let's say they find an issue, and if they can resolve it, great, but if they can't, they then need to raise it. And following discussions with the two other teams, it's actually discovered to be a ward issue. And it might be the head of the ward can solve it, but following consultation with the two other wards, 2 Bravo and 3 Charlie, it's discovered this is actually a departmental issue. At this point, either the department might be able to solve it, make changes to policy, request a new bit of equipment, or it could be found that Department X and Department Z are having the same problem, and actually this is a hospital issue. And by following the same logic as we've built up through the hierarchy, it may be the hospital can solve the issue, or it may be that it's a trust issue across multiple hospitals that come under its area of responsibility. Now, it's really important this information is gathered and passed up at each level, as there's opportunity to identify themes and trends. Because the further up the hierarchy you go, potentially there are some pretty difficult decisions to make about tapping into that finite pot of resource. It could be Ward 1 Alpha really needs something, but it will come at the expense of a capability in Department X or a new bit of equipment for Ward 3 Charlie. And by presenting evidence in the correct manner, which we'll go through in the next slide, you're better able to inform the decision makers about the priority of the lesson that you've raised. Another really important element is feedback coming back down through the hierarchy. For example, that team in the bottom left where we started might view their issue as the most important to them, but don't necessarily have the sight across, say, the other 10 priorities that the hospital is having to consider and deciding where to allocate resource. As such, feedback is vital for understanding at all levels where resolutions of lessons are currently sitting and in which order of priority. As promised, I'm now going to go through some of the tools we use for analysis and capture of evidence from lessons. We use the analytical tool called the 5 whys, and it really is as simple as asking the question why 5 times over. Let's imagine we're a printing company, and the problem we're having that is one of our clients is refusing to pay for leaflets. We ask why for the first time and discover it's because the delivery was late and therefore leaflets couldn't be used due to out-of-date information. Why did that occur? It's because the job took longer than expected. Why? It's because we ran out of printer ink. Why did that occur? It's because the ink was used on a large last-minute order. And why did that occur? It's because we didn't have enough ink in stock and couldn't resupply in time. Therefore, the countermeasure, having identified the root cause, is to find an ink supplier who can deliver at short notice so we can continue to minimise inventory, reduce waste and respond to customer demand. I just want to highlight here, though, that there are no right answers when you get down into the countermeasure space. This is more about doing analysis and presenting a logical argument as to why you want something to change. As an alternative, if you look back to the fourth why, ink was used on a large last-minute order, it could be that the countermeasure as a result of this is actually we don't accept large last-minute orders, given that it could jeopardise our ink stock for existing customers. Once we've done our analysis, though, we need to take forward the information and capture it in a format that allows us to present our argument and allows it to be retained for future use. In the Army, we use something called the ODCR format. Again, this comes from NATO and stands for Observation, Discussion, Conclusion and Recommendation. And you can use the analysis from the 5 whys to populate all of the headings you see in front of you. In reality, it may not fit as neatly as what I'm about to show you, but it gives you a good idea for a handrail. So the title is really about getting down the problem, and the first why fits neatly into the observation space. The discussion is where you present the bulk of your argument, so I've highlighted the next 3 whys because the job took too long, we ran out of printer ink, and it was all used on a last minute order, can be used to populate the difference between the expected and the observed situation, and I'll come back again to that in a moment because it's really important. But it's also where you can highlight the impact that the problem had and any ideas about what the causes are. In the conclusion, you identify your root cause, the last why, and then the countermeasure is the recommendation. So in future, we'll find an ink supplier who can deliver at short notice. Another point to note here is that actually in the recommendation space, if you have an action body, someone or something that can solve the problem, it's worth highlighting. It may be wrong, but it's helping those decision makers potentially highlight where they should be seeking a solution. Finally, coming back to the point I just raised about expected and observed. The reason that it's important is because that's where you demonstrate the evidence as to why you, Ward 1 Alpha from the previous example, need something ahead of, say, the capability proposed in Department X or the new piece of equipment for Ward 3 Charlie. By going through what should have happened and what did happen, you're demonstrating the shortfall to the decision makers. It's simply not good enough to go, we just need a new piece of equipment, because you're not providing any contrast as to what would happen if you didn't have it. So to finish off, I just want to recap the 3 tenets that I mentioned at the start regarding an effective lessons culture. The first one is about recognizing that lessons are about the growth mindset. It's about getting a little bit better each time we do something to avoid mistakes which have happened before and passing that information on to those who come after so that they are in the best position to deliver the best performance. What you've not heard me talk about is apportioning blame or finger pointing, and I hope you realise that actually an open and honest culture is all part of allowing that growth to happen. Finally, everybody has a part to play in the process, and you'd be amazed at who actually has a macro level view on certain issues and where credible, easy to implement, cost and resource effective solutions come from. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to what I've had to say today, and hopefully you found it of use. I wish you all the very best for the future. Goodbye.